in some views, the failure to meet the points of conversion. But what we are witnessing here is the simple elimination of the Orthodox Church in Ukrainian Orthodox Church. The Ministry of Culture in Ukraine initiated establishment of a commission that will be operational until the 30th of May this year. What will it prove? It is unbelievable. It is something you can't understand. Or it's only for Bulgakov to use such facts in his writings. They established a commission in order to check the relics of the saints. Why, I would ask? It was done in order to determine their historical and scientific value. We are talking about the relics of the saints. I think it is too strong even for Bulgakov. Obviously, in advance, they made the decision to classify the outcomes of this work. So they are taking stock of the relics of the saints. It is a sign of moral degradation of Ukraine that is stuck in godlessness and disrespect for the feelings of the believers of the junta. Mr. Lavrov said in a recent press conference that in the West, all those who are behind these terrible actions and crimes by the Kiev regime, apparently they don't believe in anything but the Satan. It's not by coincidence that on the 8th of March, the cross almost fell from the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. It is a bad omen that was interpreted by many Ukrainians as remembers that the Zelensky regime has betrayed canonical orthodoxy. All those who are engaged in metaphysics should decide how to interpret it, but there are facts requiring a political, moral, and historical assessment. It's something we are talking about today. The believers also took note that the cross fell down from the Sophia Cathedral in Kiev several months before the special military operation. The head of the church designated by the Orthodox Church of Ukraine attributed this accident to the so-called vibration from the Russian shellings. Although they also remembered that the church, the cathedral, required a comprehensive renovation. It is remarkable that in 2023-2024, the schismatics commemorated Ivan Mazepa, whom the Russian Orthodox Church anathemized in 1708 for the state treason. So once again, we'll reiterate that the purposes of the special military operation, the denazification and the demilitarization of Ukraine, will be reached. I would like to remind you of something. Many were shattered by the words voiced by the EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Kaja Kallas, that the Kiev regime never hits civilians in the territory of the Russian Federation. Public officials and lay people were shattered by these words. Those who are not involved in any active countering to the Kiev regime and the Ukrainian armed forces, those who have their own business, they might feel compassion, but they are not so much involved. Even they were shattered, and even they sent us emails and called us. They said, either it is a horrible lie, that a woman who realizes what suffering and pain is, what it means for parents to lose their children, what it means to hit the socially vulnerable population. What is it? It's a dehumanization. So people asked, why is it that a EU official dares saying such words? They are informed. They have been informed about what's going on, not only starting from 2020. Our diplomats provided such information during the meetings, but even before 2022, they received the information directly in the course of negotiations with the Foreign Minister of Russia, Mr. Sergei Lavrov. On any occasion of a meeting with Brussels, the European official, Minister Lavrov raised what was going on in Donbass and shared with them the information and handed over the materials about what was going on in Ukraine, what was dealt to the civil population. They pretend not to know about it, but we will continue to remind them of what's going on. I will now present you the information about children who suffered and were killed at the hands of the criminal activities by the Kiev regime, starting from 2014 and up until now. These data was presented by our special representative for the crimes of the Kiev regime, Mr. Miroshnik. He collected it in close cooperation with our law enforcement agencies and the regions and regional authorities, and with the public organizations and common citizens. These data are not final, and I'm not saying that they are completely precise.
Because this day when Sucha was liberated and when our servicemen, our people entered the yards, the households, the cellars, and they saw, as they said, and they showed them children's skulls. This data will be there will be additions to this data, but I will mention something in order for you to have an idea, everyone to have an idea what the Kiev regime, financed by the West, what it did with children, in order for you to have the data and the timeline. Within these 10 years, the Ukrainian subhuman militants, they have blood of more than 1,700 children on their hands. It's just preliminary numbers. After yesterday video published by Russian media with direct quotes of our servicemen who liberated Sucha and held in their hand a skull that is likely, probably, skull of a child. You understand how many such findings, tragic, terrible, how many findings will follow. According to the Joint Center of Control and Coordination of Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republic, since 2014, from the start of the special military operation, not less than 129 children were killed in the republics of Donbass, and more than 1,000 minors suffered back then. It's before 2022, I would repeat. And since the end of February 2022, due to the actions by Bandera junta, more than 830 minors were wounded and at least 218 children were killed. It's just official data. For 2024, the victims and those who suffered because of neo-Nazis, Those were 347 children. The youngest girl who suffered, who was killed by Ukraine Nazis, she was just 4 months old. Children were exploded, blown up on mines, cluster munitions. When explosive objects disguised as toys were the reasons of the tragedies, the Punishers scattered them in places frequented by children as well. The number of minor Russians who suffered because of drone attacks, it amounted 55. 44 miners were wounded. Drone operators attacked markets, public spaces, cafes. Only in December 2024, due to deliberate strikes by drones made against small households, private households, 9 boys of 9 and 12 years old were killed. In December, in Starodub village, another tragedy was miraculously avoided. A child of 8 years remained alive but suffered moderate injuries to his thoracic spine. The number of those who suffered due to criminal activities of the Ukrainian army grew. 127 children were wounded, 11 were killed. In Belgorod region, 88 children were wounded, 12 were killed. In Kursk region, 24 were wounded, 24 children were wounded, and 4 children were killed. Moreover, according to the Ministry of Education of the Russian Federation, because of the barbaric shootings in the Donetsk, Lugansk, Kherson, Zaporozhye, Belgorod, Bryansk, Kursk regions, at least 2,242 children were deprived of possibility to go to kindergartens. 173,762 children were transferred to online studies. At least 396 kindergartens were damaged. 9 of them were destroyed. 503 schools were damaged. 35 were destroyed. 104 educational organizations were damaged. 5 were destroyed. That is, it's the statistical data that will become a gravestone for the Kiev regime. And now just think, everyone who regularly in the EU countries, in NATO countries, votes for assistance to Kiev regime, what you are voting for, against who you are voting, who you are targeting by your weapons, and where those funds, tens, hundreds, and we now see more significant sums, millions of euros and dollars. Now it's many voices in the NATO space about the prospects of deployment of troops from Europe in Ukraine. Just have a look. Some leaks, some media reports, some plans by Paris and London to send to Ukraine, as they say, European peacekeeping contingent. And we have heard that recently even Copenhagen expressed its willingness to join this initiative. It seems that Denmark can lose Greenland now, but yes, they have to to protect not their borders, but something else. It's not a new idea. A year ago, French President Emmanuel Macron announced his intention to send French military personnel to war in Ukraine. Such so-called initiatives will lead only to the escalation of the situation. The estimates were provided by Sergei Lavrov during his meetings on the 11th of March in Moscow with the OSCE Secretary General. There was an interview by Russian Foreign Ministry published yesterday. On Wednesday, you can study that on the Foreign Ministry website and on social media, official social media accounts of the ministry. We think that just making such statements, telling about such plans, is not a step towards the settlement of the conflicts. It's harmful illusion, forming harmful illusion with the top official in Kiev. We think that the reason they just why Washington distances from these plans, they just know where that they have some ideas where that could lead. And their forces are in Ukraine at least from 2015 as instructors, as counselors, as some volunteers in violation of legislation on the prohibition of mercenarism. But under some disguises, they are present there. They support, they counsel during Banderite operation terrorist attacks against our country and citizens. We have regularly talked about that. On participation in terrorist activities together with Kiev regime of those who committed crimes by leading, providing information and representing NATO countries. We know that some political forces in Europe just continue to put a spoke in the wheel of the process that is being planned that could lead to settlement, to peace. And just one word, peace, settlement, just causes anger among them. Because their main task is, of course, escalation and slaughter. Ukrainian citizens, they can know for certain who they are to thank for the prolonging conflict. Zelensky and those supporting him, the leaders of that NATO of Europe, who stand for continuing weapons supplies, sponsor terrorist activities, and now think about some pseudo peacekeepers. You know, there is also, despite legal estimation, political analysis, there is also some common sense. Just think about it. The word peacekeeper is a key part of this word is peace. But what are those who want in some NATO capitals to send some contingents to Ukraine? There are no declarations about peace there. And there have been no talk about peaceful life, about settlement for all those years. What is that? They're talking about militarization for 1 trillion euros. Deployment of any armed formations of other states is unacceptable to us. Some allegedly peacekeeping operations, they are offered, proposed by those who do not have the word peace in their lexicology at all. All those repeated ideas is just familiar to us, is painfully familiar to us. That would mean the involvement of those countries into a direct armed conflict with our country, and to which we will respond with all the available means. And of course, the French government is just making some bright statements. we need to tell about our former partners trying to misappropriate, but to put things in their proper names, to steal the Russian assets frozen in the territory of the European Union as part of illegal restrictive measures. The Russian position on this issue is unchanged. All the blocked Russian funds are the property of the Russian Federation. The appropriation of profits from financial operations without the relevant consent of the Russian side is, I would underline once again, theft. No matter what pseudo-legal constructs it may be disguised under. Those alleged seizure of excess revenues and allegedly legal, it just does not stand up to any criticism. Such unilateral actions constitute the appropriation of this of the property of a foreign state, and it's negative for the image of the EU among the international community and global investors. It demonstrates that they are not interested in a long-term settlement of the crisis around Ukraine and intend to continue to heavily supply weapons to the Kiev regime in order to continue the conflict, to create such possibilities. And now the bloody mystification, bloody staging. Now another anniversary, bloody anniversary, is nearing. It has been mentioned many times by our top officials, by foreign minister, on the platforms of international organizations, many briefings where we mentioned that. On the 3rd of April, it will be 3 years from the time of the order and staged beforehand, the staging in the settlement of Bucha of the Kiev region. Back then, stories were invented about the alleged killings of local civilians by Russian servicemen, as they said. Despite the obviously staged nature of this provocation, all the Western media politicians started to distribute this information. It was a pretext for not conducting negotiations, not looking for any peaceful settlement of this situation. No political process are needed, as they said. NATO countries and that collective Brussels spoke back then about solutions on the battlefield. Russia has repeatedly provided detailed refutations of this fake, while Ukraine and its Western handlers do not even attempt to provide any evidence of the accusations made against Moscow. It's absolutely unacceptable that the Kiev regime is condoned in this by international organizations, including the United Nations. I would remind you, according to its charter, it's obliged to be neutral and maintain an equidistant distance line. Being aware that the Kiev regime will not speak against itself and provide details about its bloody provocation. At least 3 times, Sergei Lavrov just presented this question before the United Nations Secretary General, addressed as well the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights with a request for assistance in obtaining the relevant data. In particular, in September 2024, through the permanent mission of Russia in New York, a request was transmitted for investigation of the events of the staging provocations in Bucha in order to provide for the protection of the rights of the victims of the tragedy. In January this year, they called again on the United Nations Secretariat to speed up the response to this appeal. What do you think? Despite all that, Our requests still remain unanswered by the UN Secretariat. It was just some distraction, just some unclear replies, or some words you understand everything. That should be the testimony that in the UN they also understand everything, but just cannot express that. We have not managed to obtain a list of the victims of the provocation from the Ukrainian side. It's on the 22nd of September 2022, Sergei Lavrov, our foreign minister, publicly addressed the UN Secretary General with this request. He repeatedly reminded Antonio Guterres of his requests during his personal meetings and telephone conversations, but those efforts had no effect. At a briefing on the 25th of October 2023, the UN Secretary General representative Stefan Dujarric said that there was no information as to why Kyiv had not yet handed over to Moscow the mentioned list of victims and was not aware of the obstacles that the Ukrainian side had. At the beginning of February this year, Antonio Guterres once again said that they do not have the list of the victims. It's clear that they do not have the list because that was a staging. The cynical, bloody provocation. Its organizers just have no facts to prove that. Just empty words and accusations. But hundreds of global media participated in this staging. Were they aware about that? I do not know. Or were they cynically used? But even if they did not realize that back then, no one just put obstacles for them to conduct an investigation, but they did not conduct an investigation. We once again demand that the United Nations Secretariat stop covering up the Ukrainian stagings. And this particular staging in Bucha aimed at discreditation of our country. We call upon the UN Secretariat to conduct a thorough investigation into the tragedy in Bucha to identify those responsible for this heinous crime by the Kyiv regime.
Instead, investigating cases in Bucha, for example, or on the explosion on northern stream pipelines, the countries of the very European Union quasi-investigate to pretend like they do. The Belgian publishing and Observer, as well as the French newspaper Le Monde, the Radio Freedom, unexpectedly, and which is revealing at the same time, joined the pseudo investigation. We know the authors of this fake. They tried for many years to make a name for themselves on sensations that ostensibly exist in the NATO corridors. This is yet another action. They describe a story of a person, their activities on social media, and then they label them as Russian spies. Besides violating basic rights or basic rules of journalist ethics, they even stoop to distortion of facts that do not fit. But this does not stop anyone, because we have data published by Washington how the US aid paid for such information campaigns. They also mention our diplomat, and then they look for signs of their ties with special services or something that can be presented as spying. Sometimes they accuse them in arson, killings, terror attacks, cyber attacks, and all of those things are attributed to unnamed people that ostensibly have ties with Russia, but without any arguments, without proof. But it's easy to just say those things and later come up with another story. In this time, it's delirium, and it's not only difficult to comment on it. There's no sense doing it. These materials have nothing to do with common sense, and we will post the list of these materials. We'll publish them on our official website. All of this is based on ungrounded information, and those are false ideas. They were created as such. But the question is, why do they need this? But the answer is there. Brussels wants to continue to further escalate relations with Russia. We can remember the materials with Ursula von der Leyen and 3 trillion euros that have to be received from people in the European countries and be used against our country and democracy in Ukraine. I forgot to mention that. Even for this, the large-scale ideological brainwashing campaign was started. The European population are threatened with the made-up threat from the East, only to get to the pockets of European people to finance aspirations imposed by the political leadership in the EU. But Ursula von der Leyen does that. She first asked for hundreds of thousands of euros to procure vaccines outside of the EU. She just agreed via text messages to procure vaccines for tens of millions of euros, and then they destroyed them. So it is impossible to identify how many vaccines were used, and not to establish the quality of those vaccines. But there is another project. Ursula von der Leyen now can pump money for another purpose, because armaments are more expensive. That's why such publications are needed. Every day it's getting more and more clear that this anti-Russian policy is harmful for the EU countries, and this policy will lead to deterioration in social and economic situation in the European countries and the degradation of the security situation on the continent. The statement of the General Secretary of NATO on Bosnia and Herzegovina, we took note of it because there were a lot of question about it. Mark Rutte, during his recent visit to Bosnia and Herzegovina on March 11th, amid political crisis in this country, he called on the Presidium of Bosnia and Herzegovina to settle the problem. He clearly meant the situation with the leadership of the Serb Republic. The fact that this problem did not happen on its own, and with the involvement of the Western masters of Sarajevo, was willingly admitted by Rutte. He essentially fueled the internal Bosnian crisis by calls to expedite Euro-Atlantic integration of Bosnia and Herzegovina. It is yet another provocation aimed to exacerbate the situation in the country, where their potential membership in NATO is perceived ambiguously. Rutte praised illegitimate High Representative Christian Schmidt, whose activities are questionable because there is no legal basis for his presence there. He supported the presence of European forces in the country and said that that NATO will prevent security vacuum in the country. That's how EU and NATO are becoming one thing, and this cynical address of Rutte to the authorities of Bosnia and Herzegovina is was also noted by us, and Brussels spent hundreds of millions received through corrupt measures amid social and economic problems in this country as well as other countries of the EU. Such recommendations look out of place yet again, but who thinks about people of the EU countries? This is an example of interference into internal affairs of a sovereign country. NATO can continue planning to take control of all spheres of life in the Bosnia and Herzegovina. They want to overcome the resistance of local political forces in terms of convergence with NATO. Everything should work for militarization of these crazy ideas of Brussels. I mean, crazy ideas to militarize the western part of the European continent. But people, coexistence of people of different nationalities in a country with a difficult history in Bosnia and Herzegovina are of no importance to Brussels. They have other aims. Pakistan were shocked by the terrorist attack on a train. As you know, it took place on March 11th. Civilians were affected. We strongly condemn this terror attack as well as other forms of terrorism in all its manifestations. Barbaric actions of terrorists cannot be justified. Those responsible must be punished. We express solidarity with Islamabad in the face of this global threat, and we are committed to strengthening constructive cooperation with Pakistan in counterterrorism. We had questions in line with the decree of President of our country on our diplomatic presence in the Dominican Republic. In this context, all the procedures to establish the embassy of the Russian Federation there were completed. The decree of the President of Russia appoints Alexei Seredin as Ambassador Extraordinary Plenipotentiary of the Russian Federation to the Dominican Republic. He is going to arrive there in the nearest future. Our contacts historically were based on mutual respect, consideration of interests of each other, friendship, solidarity. On March the 8th, our countries celebrated the 18th anniversary of the establishment of our diplomatic relations. Today, we interact with success in various spheres. We maintain political dialogue. We are united by our cultural values, interests in development of technological, cultural ties, tourism. We are sure that the establishment of the Embassy of Russia there will contribute to amplification of cooperation between our countries and will additionally support our citizens who live there. On March the 8th marks 10th anniversary of the treaty signed between the Russian Federation and the Republic of South Ossetia on alliance and integration. It was signed in 2015. It creates unified space for security, among other things, in social and economic and humanitarian spheres. It implements the investment programs. It provides for eased procedures to receive Russian citizenship, better average salaries of officials in South Ossetia and pensions of Russians who live there, facilitation of development of education, science, culture, art, sports, and tourism. The results of the implementation of the treaty are positive. It helped intensify political and interagency interaction. It strengthened security in the southern borders of Russia. In their turn, volunteers and those who were drafted from there contribute to the special military operation. South Ossetia, with the support of Russia, achieved good results in statehood building, economy, higher quality of life of the population. The GDP reached 8.3 billion rubles, and the average salary rose to 33.9 thousand rubles in economy and 31.5 thousand rubles in budgetary institutions. This program, another investment program to facilitate social and economic development for 2023-2025, implement 44 events. Our cooperation is fully in line with the interests of the nations of Russia and South Ossetia. Several humanitarian, very interesting events. In Brazil, March the 15th marks 25th anniversary of a project between Russia and Brazil, the first and the only foreign school of state academia of the Bolshoi Theater. It became a very important element of our presence in the region. The alumni of this school that turned into an important center to train highly professional ballet dancers perform in the leading ballet teams in 27 countries from on 5 continents. Our people also can see them. 9 alumni work in the theaters of St. Petersburg, Kazan, Perm, and Samara. This project was of utmost importance in terms of its importance for the Brazilian society. It was created as a social project. The education is free of charge, and it gives an opportunity for people with low-income families to professionally study ballet. Also, the curriculum also includes compulsory school subjects. It is great that traditions of the Bolshoi Theater that next year, in 2026, celebrates 250th anniversary since its establishment, are highly valued all over the world. It's a symbol of our country. It's a symbol of the world culture. Russian opera, national ballet were born there, and this anniversary will be celebrated in our country. The events will also take place in other countries as well. As to the school, we congratulate the leadership of the country, those who work there, and everyone who was involved in this project. We wish further success and prosperity. There's one more important humanitarian issue. On May 5 through 12, in the city of Belo Horizonte, Brazil, the Federal University of Minas Gerais hosts 59th International Mendeleev School Chemistry Olympiad. It is traditionally organized by the chemistry faculty of the MSU with the support of the foundation of Andrei Melnichenko. And partner organizer of this year is the Federal University of Minas Gerais. The International Mendeleev Olympiad is a major competition in chemistry. It has been taking place since 1967. In 1997, it became a successor in all union school chemistry and continued its numeration. The competition brings together high schoolers who won national Olympiads. Russian team usually shows good results. In 2024, the competition was hosted by Shenzhen, China. It was organized by Joint Russia-China University, Beijing Polytechnical University, and Municipal People's Government of Shenzhen. All 10 Russian representatives received medals, 5 golden ones and 5 silver ones. We wish all the participants success. We believe in you. And we wish the spirit of a friendly competition to take place and to seize this opportunity to show their abilities. Let's move on to questions. It's the International Affairs with us. Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. You mentioned the situation in Bosnia and Herzegovina.
So I would like to ask you a clarifying question. I'm talking about your comments that the Prosecutor General's Office of Bosnia and Herzegovina ordered to arrest the leader of Bosnian Serbs, Milorad Dodik, and his assistants. Well, as you mentioned correctly, we focus on this topic today and we regularly comment on it. It is a legal arbitrariness. I remember that a couple of years ago some reporters said we shouldn't talk about it in the diplomatic conversations, but it is nothing else but legal arbitrariness. For a long time, the legitimately elected leader of the Bosnian people was harassed. I'll remind you, we are talking about a person who was legitimately elected by the people of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and it's taken place in the context of a large-scale political campaign against Republic Srpska. So those are not just individual problems of someone with somebody. It's obvious that politicization is eliminating the legitimacy, and it is nothing but a political attack against an ethnic and cultural entity, against the people represented by Milorad Dodik. There are efforts to accuse the leader of the Bosnian Serbs in order to eliminate him from the political arena, to serve the interests of the Euro-Atlantic agenda. It is not simply being imposed. It is a trust from the top, from the West. What is at stake, probably? Well, probably many things are at stake. So despite the law, despite moral and ethical considerations and the common sense, it is being done in such an ugly way. Unfortunately, we regret that settling scores with opponents is being done with the help of the Bosnian justice system that, quite on the contrary, is called to provide for the freedoms and rights and fundamental principles of equality of three entities and two entities and three peoples of Bosnia and Herzegovina. We'll reiterate once again the desire to cancel Republic Srpska will have most serious consequences for the peace, security and stability of both Bosnia and Herzegovina and the Balkans. In general, as one of the guarantors of the Dayton Agreement, we insist on immediate stop of politically motivated persecution of legal representatives of Republic Srpska, resumption of dialogue between all peoples of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and elimination of dangerous and destructive interference of Western forces. We know Milorad Dodik and his assistants as true patriots of their people, and any attempts to invite stories about them and their links to our country are not true, and their compatriots understand it. It is something that is understood by those who entrusted them with their responsibility to decide on their future, the future of this long-suffering population. Everything that is being done by those people, I'm talking about President Dodik and his assistants, is aimed not only at the development of context-friendly relations with other countries, but first and foremost on upholding the rights and freedom of its people. We could call them the defenders of rights and interests of the Serbian people. I sincerely believe that all difficulties and all hardships that they have to endure will be overcome by these people. Thank you so much. Ria Novosti, are you with us? Yes, Madam Zakharova, good afternoon. We have one question to you today. The West continues accusing Russia of using the veto right during the votings in Security Council. Can you give us statistics about how many times Russia has applied its veto right since 1991 and how often it has been applied by the US, France and the UK? Well, before giving you statistics, I'll tell you that it's not only statistics. Those are not only facts. We should understand the internal mechanisms. According to US diplomats themselves, who worked either in the UN headquarters representing their own country or in their publications, the US political figures and political analysts assured that sometimes they deliberately provoked other countries, primarily our country, to veto some documents in order to contribute to such statistics. But let me give you more details. Let's start from 1991. Since that time, Russia has applied the veto right 39 times. The US has applied it 22 times and China 18 times. The UK and France haven't formally applied their veto right. But at the same time, we have to look into the details. Let me explain to you how the mechanisms in the UN Security Council work. The current configuration of the UN Security Council makes it possible for the Western countries to use the hidden veto right. According to paragraph 3 of Article 27 of the UN Charter, decisions of the UN Security Council on all topics except for procedural issues are considered as adopted when there are 9 votes in favor, including those votes of all permanent members that coincide. So the Western countries, including the allies, can block any initiatives without using the veto right as such. So they simply prevent a document from reaching the needed number of votes. The key issue is that our country always treated the veto right not as a privilege, but as an important mechanism in the work of the UN Security Council that pushes and encourages and inspires its members to search for compromises. That was the idea behind the veto right. It was designed as a signal lamp that demonstrates to the international community that it hasn't been able to agree, that it has to return to the negotiating table and continue the work in order to find compromises, solutions, and agreements. Moscow is aware of its responsibility as a permanent member of the UN Security Council, and it will continue to use the veto right in a faithful manner only in the exceptional cases and in the interest of elaborating long-term and just solutions. A remarkable situation took place when the situation in Ukraine was considered in the UN Security Council on the 24th of February this year. Washington presented a brief text with a call to swift and long-term settlement of the conflict without any accusations against Russia. At the same time, the EU representatives and the UK on the very set date try in the General Assembly to introduce into it the wording with accusations against our country and with partial quoting and reference to the principles of the UN Security Council. We were forced to veto these amendments that could derail this important initiative, as a constructive initiative that could be turned into an anti-Russian and unacceptable document. In my view, all these debates about the statistics of the use of the veto right, the history of the veto, should not push to the sidelines the key problem, namely the failure to observe and respect the already adopted UN Security Council resolutions. Probably I should clarify what I'm talking about. Look at how much attention is paid by the Western mainstream media to how many documents and resolutions have been vetoed by Russia. Why are not they similarly scrupulous when it comes to the number of resolutions of the UN Security Council that have been adopted, sometimes unanimously, sometimes without approval of the most majority of everyone, but with the consent of the most. But sometimes they are implemented in a distorted manner, or sometimes it even happens that documents are not considered as guiding documents, although they are supposed to be used by the world community. And the countries that co-sponsored the resolution do exactly the opposite to the spirit and letter of the documents for which they voted and which they sponsored. And no one pays any attention to this. No one collects any statistics and takes stock of it. If you ask me for specific examples, I'll give you one. It is a situation with the Minsk agreements. They were endorsed in the form of UN Security Council resolution in support of the agreements reached in Minsk those days, and those very countries that either were involved in the elaboration of the Minsk agreements in 2015 or were sitting in the UN Security Council and voted in favor of this document. Those very countries acted against this document after it has been adopted. They didn't violate it indirectly, but they directly countered its implementation, opposed its implementation. And later it turned out that France, that was involved in elaboration of the Minsk Agreement and was a guarantor of the Minsk Agreements, and was at that time the permanent member of the UN Security Council, it misled the international community. It was mentioned by the then President of France, by the President who then participated in the elaboration of the Minsk Agreement, President Hollande. He said France was never going to implement it, neither as the Minsk Agreements nor as in the form of the UN Security Council resolution. That's the key problem in our view. So if we are to conduct an investigation, I'm talking about a journalist investigation or a survey, the situation should be treated in a comprehensive way. It's not only a matter of statistics, and it's not only a matter of procedural tweaks related to the obvious need to reform the institutions of the United Nations. This problem should be treated in a comprehensive way. One have to look at what irresolvable situation exists today that can't be helped by the reform of the UN Security Council or some statistic changes. It is a matter of mentality, a destructive mentality with false assumptions of those who consider the UN and the international law not as an instrument aimed at the search for peaceful settlement, but as an instrument for promoting their narrow political goals and as an instrument to inflict a strategic defeat on the peace in the world. Thank you. Is the Senhora here with us? Yes, we are here. Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. I have the following question. Recently, the Department of State of the U.S. revised its fact sheet on Taiwan that is published on its official website. The previous wording that the U.S. did not support the independence of Taiwan has been deleted. How would you comment on it? Well, first, let me say that the principled position of the Russian Federation of Taiwan is well known and it remains unchanged, and it has been repeatedly endorsed at the top level. Let me reiterate once again, Taiwan is an integral part of China, and the government of People's Republic of China is its only official leader, and we support the territorial integrity and we closely cooperate in the field of security. That's the main thing that I wanted to say. And as for the steps that you mentioned, they are nothing else but a violation of international law, including by the Americans themselves, as they violate the One China principle. The U.S. and their allies signed, as you probably would know, new contracts for weapon supplies. They strengthen political contacts on different levels. I'm talking about the contacts with the island. But they are doing so not for the sake of cooperation, but for the sake of creating tensions in the region and as an instrument of pressure against Beijing and the Chinese people. This ideology contradicts the previously adopted obligations of commitments of Washington with regards to the region. and fuels separatist sentiments. You said you have some more questions. No, that was my only question. Thank you. Is Russia today here with us? Yes, we are here. Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. We would like to ask you the following question in the backdrop of the resumed Russia-US dialogue and the modified rhetorics of the US with regards to Russia. What is the chance that Moscow-Washington relations will become equal relations? And can we say that we are already witnessing the message, the signals of such developments? Thank you. Well, I believe we should take note of any signals, but at the same time we should focus on specific steps and specific actions. It's not because we wouldn't like to believe in the best, but it's because we have, unfortunately, already witnessed the cases when words contradicted, deeds contradicted the words, or the message contained in the words was distorted. So I'll reiterate, we do read the signals, we support the constructive sentiments aimed at the development of peace and cooperation by the current incumbent US administration. And any country that might send such signals, but at the same time we focus on specific steps and deeds, and it is by these steps that we develop and elaborate our policy when it comes to bilateral relations and so on. Thank you so much. Is Izvestia here with us? Yes, good afternoon. Secretary of State of the U.S. Marco Rubio said the U.S. is going to prevent the use of hostile rhetoric against Russia in the G7. What does Moscow think of such a step, and can we say that Washington is now more moderate when it comes to the assessment of the situation in Ukraine?
Let me separate it into two questions. We have already noted that even within the framework of G20, American representatives, although they have not delegated the head of this Department of State, they were represented at the level of the ambassador of that country. Their statements were without the previous administration's aggression, Russophobia, and their mood was different. Those processes, those symptoms, they're obvious. We have already noted them, and we have noted the statements of the American representatives who, I repeat once again, are constructive in nature, aimed at dialogue, maintaining contacts and relations. We have noted that it has been noted at the highest level in our country. Your second question was about, is it possible to say that Washington is more realistic in its assessment of the situation in Ukraine? So I think it's the team that has come to power, that is in White House. They should know what is now happening in Ukraine. And the previous team also knew what was happening there. It's just the tasks, the objectives of the teams of Obama, Biden, and their members were different from the objectives they declared. They spoke allegedly about supporting democracy in Ukraine, but they actually killed that democracy in Ukraine. They just mutilated everything, the electoral system, political system in that country. It was supposed to reflect the will of the people, but it just turned into some fake events with the participation of Western countries. They just pushed the country towards militarization, towards conflicts in the regions. They talked about respect to the legislation, but actually they were rewriting Ukrainian legislation, and they were talking about respect for sovereignty of Ukraine, but actually they totally subordinated the Kiev regime to their will and destroyed the Ukrainian independence by making this country just dependent in all the spheres, in all the fronts. The Biden administration was also aware about the events in Ukraine. It was more than aware. It implemented its own project in many ways there. It is indeed repeatedly all over the world in historical periods by other teams of presidents in the White House. This team and the previous team, they know what is happening there. Their relations are different. And it's expressed even openly. I would like to underline once again that the previous team in the White House was concealing its true intentions. It just needed an instrument to implement its corruptive schemes, corruptive intentions. They needed an instrument to resolve the domestic problems in the United States of America. They needed Russophobia, they needed Ukrainian conflict for that. They needed such an instrument that is the Kiev regime for the implementation of their geopolitical ideas. And they just presented it as supporting the young and growing, strengthening Ukrainian economy and supporting its stance in international affairs. And this team is just highlighting the true approaches of the previous administration, talking about corruption and what is presented as their ideas. It was not actually, and it was actually contrary to their true tasks. And we should not be talking about some team not being aware of the real situation. They were and they are aware of the real situation. They know what is happening there. Just look at the documents revealed by USAID. There's corruptive schemes, financing of those processes, killing of the democratic processes. Those documents were implemented during the previous administration, and they are revealed during the period of this administration. So they are and they were aware. Their relations are just different. I agree with you here. There is an obvious difference here. Thank you, thank you. Is Reuters with us? Madam Zakharova, hello. We have two questions. The first one is about the issue you have already mentioned. It's talks in Jeddah between the Ukraine and the United States. So, how can the outcome of these negotiations be acceptable to Russia, and what can be the response conditions of Russia here? So, as I have already mentioned, we do not talk about the statements, public statements made. We just consider them as public rhetoric. What they are ready to propose to us, it should not be in front of the microphone, but in negotiations rooms during the relevant contacts. It has not been the case so far. During the previous briefings I have already mentioned, we have not been officially notified about the outcome of this event or about something else at this stage. But as I have already mentioned, we can admit that such contacts are planned for the nearest time, and maybe even today. Then we will make comments, we will read, we will see, we will hear, study, and so on. Thank you very much. The second question is about Syria. I'm sorry talking about the previous issue. The information field is used by the Kiev regime, among other things, for hostilities against our country, also on the information track. You understand that very well. And the misinformation they are presenting as cyber attacks. Yesterday, obviously, our flags in liberated villages, settlements of the Kursk region, they are presented by the Kiev regime as relocation of the Ukrainian armed forces for better maneuvers and so on. So those obvious things, they are just trying to find some tricks to conduct some misinformation campaign and so on. We see, we hear everything, we analyze everything. But as I've already said, today we will be based on what we will hear from them officially. I mean, not from the Kiev regime, but from those who will present the American side. Thank you very much. And the second question is about the situation in Syria. In particular, what efforts are taken by Russia to settle the situation there, which countries and parties does it negotiate, if any? And does Russia allow for any interference in domestic Syrian conflicts? Maybe it will be apart from political diplomatic settlements, maybe together with the US, Israel, who stands for the preservation of Russian military bases in Syria, or maybe with Turkey. So we stand for the comprehensive settlement of the crisis in the Syrian Arab Republic and observing the sovereignty or territorial integrity of this country, the relevance of these tasks, very difficult tasks. The relevance has grown due to the recent tragic events in the west of Syria, whose assessment we have provided. We maintain contacts for the stabilization with our partners in the region, Arab states, Turkey, Iran. The Syrian issue has been discussed in detail during the trip of Foreign Minister to Ankara, Tehran, Doha. You have seen all those materials. We are open to interaction in the Syrian area with all the constructive countries and regarding the urgent consultations with the UN Security Council on Syria. Most Security Council members have similar positions and some common approaches. It provides hope that in the West the common sense will prevail for renewing the joint work in order to resolve the Syrian issue and the other problems in the Middle East. So we are working. Thank you. Thank you. Is Anna Delu with us? Madam Zakharova, hello. Our question is also about Ukraine. The European countries and France and the EU have supported the proposal about the ceasefire in Ukraine on the outcome of the negotiations in Saudi Arabia. Please excuse me, could I interrupt you here for a second? Taking into account the positions of those countries, but is it really needed? Is it really necessary? Yes, really. What have the countries mentioned by you, England, France, the majority of the EU countries, what have they done for their position to be taken into account? But they have had a chance, France, Germany, who is part of the European Union, to influence, not allowing the escalation for 7 years. They were just not just observers, but the guarantors. The guarantors of what? Of the Minsk process, of the Minsk agreements. But before that, they used to be the guarantors of Ukrainian domestic settlement process, political process. So they guaranteed those transition process of transition of power from the legal authorities to those who they supported, trying to present that as democratic reforms. They failed everywhere. They failed on Maidan with their efforts allegedly aimed at something good. They failed in Minsk agreements as guarantors. And even as those implementing the resolution binding for the entire international community, the UN resolution, the UN Security Council resolution. So let us return to the question, why is it necessary, or we can, or we need to take into account the positions of those countries? What is the proof of the relevance of their approaches? Maybe they have some merits in peace settlement. We have already mentioned Germany and Great Britain. How has it merited our trust in this field? Boris Johnson visiting Ukraine during the negotiations that had all the chances for the settlement of the situation, and just discouraged the Kiev regime to further continue them. What has London done for all those years for their position to be taken into account by us? So maybe I'm just doubt whether this question should be continued, because that's not the major issue. The major issue is just their basic approaches. It's just some media noise. They just wanted to somehow play this card. They will not succeed in that, because we are well aware about their basic approaches. The basic approaches about the escalation of the situation, Russophobia, and even the racism, if they change that, we will take them into account. And now, no, there are honestly no prerequisites for their such hysterical opinion to be taken into account. Even without taking that into account, is it not contrary? Just the European countries seeking the ceasefire. Once again, could you repeat? For the ceasefire to be introduced, taking into account the Russian position. So it's the same Britain, France, and the EU representatives on a daily basis talking about weapons supplies and intensified weapons supplies. Is it the same countries? What are you talking about? Where's the word peace there? Peace in the militarist aspirations of Ursula von der Leyen. Where is the word peace in those militarized statements by certain European countries? Where is the word peace in those nuclear umbrellas, nuclear shields of Macron? I have not seen that. Where is peace mentioned? Just a single document, statement, conference on this issue. I have heard about conference on some plan of victory, of trouble of Zelensky, some formulas of peace, but actually formulas of war, but stable peace process, taking into account the basic root causes of the crisis, human rights they just so care about so much. Many problems created by themselves. I have not heard about their peaceful settlement. Thank you. Thank you, Isabel Rusin, for with us. Hello, Madam Zakharova. There is an active information media campaign about Russia needing a ceasefire in Ukraine, but not peace. Do you think that Americans and Europeans just they want to deceive us, as they have done with the Minsk agreement, in order to rearm Ukraine for further active phase of war with Ukraine? So the question, why is President Trump so insistent about the ceasefire? Why does he need the ceasefire in Ukraine? So you have just 3 tracks here. I could answer. Firstly, I am following the news. And I would like to share this news with you. The Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation has reported about the liberation of Sochi in the Kursk region and about the villages there. So it's the reply to the questions, many questions asked today, and that's what has been stated as our objectives as our targets. Our country is implementing its objectives, and I would like to draw your attention to the statements made by President Vladimir Putin yesterday in the Kursk region. These statements, these words, these talking points, they're just supported by our people. So you're just now saying deceived, not deceived, hearing, not hearing. So that's what we aspire for. That's what we live in. What President Trump wants now. He has repeatedly said that it's the slaughter organized by his predecessors. Now you just remember his quotes, unneeded, insane, not needed to anyone. He has just explained it on many occasions. Now they will hear about that from them directly when they arrive in our country and share about the issue of Jeddah, negotiations in Jeddah. We move on. Are you with us? Yes, hello, Madam Zakharova. There has already been a question about the response of the European politicians due on negotiations in Jeddah. I would like to draw your attention to one quotation by Kaja Kallas and President Emmanuel Macron welcoming the negotiations in Jeddah and saying that Russia has the ball in this game as always. So it's just some attempt to create a distorted view of the situation again. I even do not want to express some irony here. It's a highly complicated crisis. When they have made such statements, they played the primary role here. They just were the handlers, the mentors of Ukraine in this game, political modeling of the young, forming democracy. They have decided actually to mock the Ukrainian people.
And now, of course, they see and the whole world sees what their project turned into, that it failed and it puts the whole population of Ukraine in a situation without a way out. But for it's a dead end for the Kiev regime. But for future, they come up with information, campaigns, ideas, and warnings to show themselves from the best side, but the EU representatives are not good at it, because at the same time they, as I said, they increase stakes in the escalation, they increase military expenditures to unrealistic figures, they expand hostile rhetoric against our country, they work out, come up and implement new sanctions packages. So don't play with words. all the Brussels minority, world minority, played too much with it. They have to realistically look at things. They have to recognize that this crisis, a perennial crisis, was fueled by them. They have to recognize their criminal mistakes in this track. Then it will be a real dialogue, but warnings are just words. We know the value of it. Thank you very much. They'd rather talk not with these phrases, but to take a look at the photos of children who were killed from the armaments that they supplied Ukraine with. They'd rather look at the photos of babies who were killed by the NATO armaments, the photos of mothers and the elderly who fell victim of their logic to divide people into those who should live in a great garden and those who are deemed to live in a jungle. They'd rather think about their own mistakes, not to promote information campaigns. They had a chance, as I said, for many years to show themselves as the EU, as the European Union, as the western part of Europe on peaceful track. And that chance was given to them by Russia through the Minsk agreements, but they did not seize it. They even recognized that they tricked the whole world and essentially themselves, because that's what they have to live with. As those who mocked Ukraine, people in Ukraine, and those who said that they were going to implement the Minsk agreements, but in reality they violated the international law because the agreements were endorsed by the UN Security Council. They violated the norms of ethics, the moral rules, and even at the civilizational level, given the scale of the tragedy. They talked a lot at Maidans. They supported nationalist feelings, reviving Nazism, turning it into neo-Nazism. That's what they should do now. Thank you. Is Media Corporation of China with us? Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. You basically answered all our questions, but I would like to ask one more question. Following the American and Ukrainian delegations' negotiations, you said that you don't have official results, but amid what's going on, how does Russia see the prospects of an ultimate peaceful agreement right now? Are there any ways to put Russia and Ukraine at the negotiation table? As you said, I commented on it today, but your question is so big. We have to wait for the announced meeting of the Russian president with the media. It was announced by the spokesman, Dmitry Peskov. They are going to talk about it. It is clear. Thank you. Thank you. Is Radio Saga with us? Probably not. Is the Moscow Post with us? Yes, good afternoon. We have two questions today. First, is there any chance that following the renewal dialogue between Russia and the US, American representatives are going to attend the St. Petersburg Economic Forum in 2025? please, can you? It's a day of revelations for me. I have a question, two questions. Do you know that the previous administration that was very Russophobic, still American businessmen came to St. Petersburg Economic Forum. Do you know about that? During all the recent years, regardless of the political situation, they participated in the St. Petersburg Economic Forum. We should know that. It's a fact. Well, we understood that. Then to question two, we never discriminated business. We always underlined that we consider regimes unfriendly to us or hostile. We consider those who pursue some policies and violate our laws of our country as unfriendly. We introduce sanctions against them, mostly as a response. We put them into stop lists. Only against those we started criminal cases, but we never discriminated neither business representatives based on the country they worked in, nor representatives of the humanitarian sphere or scientific circles. We always opposed cancel culture. We always talked that it's a crazy thing to do, and this is fully applies to various forums. So we're open to cooperation with business circles. Whether they come or no, it's up to them, but never did we deny anyone to come on the basis of nationality or citizenship in a particular country. You will never be able to put forward anything like that because it never happened. That's why the question is clear. You said you had one more question. Thank you. The next question about the killings of religious minorities in Syria. Is there information about Russian citizens being involved? Can Russian MFA do anything to protect our citizens and diplomats who are still in Syria? You know, the situation is very difficult. I can remind you that Sergei Lavrov talked about it during press conference on March 11th. We follow this situation and we are shocked by what happened in Syria. The tragedy resulted in innocent people being involved, and this cannot be justified. As to our assessments, they are of principle. We only reiterate them and proceed from the situation and how it changes, but the essence is still the same. We are concerned with the developments in Syria, and we strongly condemn mass killings. We extend our condolences to the families of the victims, and it's a great question about Russian citizens and our compatriots and citizens of our countries and citizens of Syria, from people who care from all over the world, ask questions about it, and they call and they offer help. And we even responded to those calls. The Russian airbase Khmeimim opened its doors to the locals who had been fleeing from the unrest. They understood that it was a matter of death and life, and more than 8,000, it's probably more like 9,000 Syrians, mostly women, children, were taken there. Probably this is the greatest answer about our contribution to the destiny of Syrians. We hope that the authorities in Damascus realize that they are responsible for what's going on, and we follow closely the efforts to rectify the situation with law enforcement. We hope that they will establish their national unification. There is a special commission to investigate the situation, and we hope that those responsible will be established and punished. The insurance of peace and security is an important task for the Syrian authorities during the transition period, and how successful they would deal with the situation, and they have a lot of challenges besides this. This will define the future of the Syrian Republic. The settlement of the situation is through this involvement of all the political forces and ethnic communities into decision making, and we support sovereignty and territorial integrity of Syria. A priority is to ensure security of those Russian citizens who are there and Russian facilities there. We maintain contacts with the current Syrian authorities. And some particular cases are not known to me right now. Whether Russian citizens were involved in this or not, but this is a priority for us, and we do everything we could to ensure security for Russian citizens and Russian facilities. Thank you. Thanks to you. Is international reporters with us. Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. I have a question. A petition in Italy created by our colleague Vincenzo Russo caused a great scandal. Some politicians even called the police to take measures against him. The President of the Republic of Italy said that Russia threatens Europe with nuclear weapons. I'm sorry, with what kind of weapons? With nuclear weapons. What can you say about it? You would like to tell me that President of Italy, am I right, that the President of Italy said that Russia ostensibly threats Europe with nuclear weapons? Yes, it's false. It's not true. It's a fake. It's disinformation. I said all the words. Choose the one that you think the most descriptive, or use them all. First, second, these words. One should be responsible for these words. You, as a representative of an information agency, can ask President of Italy why he said that, why he lied like that. How can he prove his words? But I'll tell you right away, he won't be able to do it. He won't find a statement, from no official statement that would be can be interpreted like that. Third, the Russian leadership, president of our country, and ministers with authority, and statesmen, officials of our country with authority, many times talked about it and did everything possible so that these fakes are refuted, and we will provide links to the statements in the text of our briefing. Another moment, I'm surprised that probably President of Italy mixed up us with some other country. It's quite difficult to do, I understand that, but probably he meant that it is France who threatens Europe with nuclear armaments, because that's how could statements made by President Macron can be interpreted. A couple of days ago, when he talked about some kind of nuclear umbrella over Europe. This nuclear that's how his words were interpreted by some. But words of a neighboring country did not cause any sensation, but they were said with an aggressive subtext. And neighboring countries did not ask questions about it. The EU countries did not ask questions, but at the same time, we see fantasies about an alleged threat from Russia. And I know the answer to this question, why it's being done. Because Russophobia and anti-Russia agenda should be kept afloat, and it needs facts. The Western Europe always say that Russia is bad. They have to come up with the ideas that Russia threatens with something. But how does Russia threaten EU countries in any way? Through energy, raw materials that we sold to Europe for many years with our projects, humanitarian and economic, with the EU countries. How does Russia threaten Italy in particular? Through the interaction with Italian business, that the Italian business has their own companies and their missions, they have profits from our country. Is that how we threaten them? Of course not. But they want to create the feeling that this threat exists, so this idea must be spread. But we see something like this not only from our Western countries, but also from Eastern countries. Listen to the officials from Tokyo. They usually refer to this topic as well. They, for some reason, use Russia, but what does Russia has to do about it? It was not the USSR who dropped nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but they want to put out of the context, the historical context, what happened, and they want to blame Russia. That's why the jungle was words.
Thank you so much. I thank you. Is news.ru with us? Madam Zakharova, we are here. My name is Mikhail Vorobyov. We are with you. We have two questions today, if I may. The ex-Chancellor of Germany, Angela Merkel, spoke out in favor of dialogue with Russia regarding the conflict in Ukraine. According to her, Europe should use diplomacy for the settlement, and it requires discussion of certain issues with Moscow. But we remember how back in 2022, Merkel admitted that Minsk agreements were signed in order to win times to build up the Ukrainian army. In your view, should we trust the diplomatic efforts of the ex-Chancellor? I think we should be guided by specific deeds, not words. We cannot trust the words of those who have deceived us once. So we should judge by specific deeds and specific steps taken by certain political figures, public officials, and we should judge them by their deeds. I think it's obvious. And I'm not saying anything new because this position has been repeatedly stated already. Thank you. And my second question is as follows. You've already said that the aftermath of the attack of the Ukrainian drones against the houses in the Moscow region were demonstrated to the OSCE delegation that was in Moscow. Could you comment on the reaction of His Excellency, the OSCE Secretary General? I think he gave his answer during the press conference. For us, it was important to demonstrate it to him so that the OSCE Secretariat cannot say they don't know. It's something now they have seen many things firsthand. There is such concept as a field study, a study on the ground. So during their field studies, they have got such a possibility. Again, the question should be posed in a different way. What matters is not the reaction of the OSCE Secretary General. He's a completely newcomer. It's just a month that he's been in the office, and he tries to adjust himself to his new role. What matters is the deep crisis that the OSCE has been driven in by the NATO countries and the EU by means of blunt violation and ignoring all the initial goals of the structure. They annihilated the principles of consensus on which the work of the organization is based. That is what matters. That's what is a cornerstone. He is the Secretary General, but the aggressive wild minority, the member states, are who distort the activities of the organization and annihilate it from within. Thank you so much. Is Bolt News with us? Yes, Madam Zakharova, good afternoon. 16th of March is approaching every day. In the Latvian capital, there is a march of veterans of the Latvian Waffen-SS Legion and its accomplices. What instruments can Russia use in order to counter glorification of Nazism in the Baltic states? And why didn't the EU and the UN take decisive measures in order to prohibit something like this? Well, we are taking efforts in order to counter neo-Nazism. Our country, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, our diplomats at international platforms in various countries where they are accredited in for more than 5 or 10 years, but for decades, have been drawing attention to this issue in order to make sure that it becomes a topic on the agenda of international relations and on the agenda of international organizations. For those purposes, we used a broad range of diplomatic tools in order to counter the revisionist policies of Latvia. Its authorities continue from year to year, as you rightly mentioned, to allow for the marches of former legionnaires of Waffen-SS in Riga, and they connive with a free, well, it was not free, but even aggressive imposition of ideology of those who adore these marchers, who belong to right radical organizations. We systemically draw attention of global community to this outrageous phenomenon by means of public statement, and we raise these issues in international organizations. We keep stressing that the cynical policy of Riga aimed at glorification of Nazi criminals goes against fundamental principles of international law and bluntly violates the decision of Nuremberg Tribunal and international legal obligations of Latvia to counter racist and xenophobic tendencies. We are working actively in the OSCE and in the UN. In the UN, Russia annually submits the resolution to fight glorification of Nazism, and it has a broad international support. It expresses a deep concern about glorification of the Nazi movement, neo-Nazism, and glorification of former members of Waffen-SS. We also refer to recommendation of Special Rapporteur of the UN Security of the UN Council on Human Rights on modern forms of fascism. According to him, the states should prohibit any glorification, official and non-official glorifications of the Nazi regime and its allies and related organizations. It is imperative that states take measures to prevent any glorification of the Nazi SS organization and its units, including Waffen-SS. Just as many other states, Russia is making its contribution to the work in the UN General Assembly. Our country regularly presents our acquisitions to Latvia in a bilateral format. As you understand, we don't have any substantive relations, although we do maintain diplomatic contacts. But we can hardly describe them as full-fledged contacts due to Latvian position. We do react to any steps in this field taken by the Baltic states, so we sent diplomatic notes with accusations that these countries violate the International Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. We are the only country that does so because it takes proactive efforts, and that's what we do. This also refers to the facts of heroic glorification of Nazis, including the honoring of veterans of Waffen-SS. Now, as for the European Union, indeed, no one wants to pay attention to the terrible situation with glorification of Nazism in the Baltic states. It's not because they don't want to resolve and address these issues internally and unpublicly. That's not how it is. In reality, it's the new normal, the new ethics of modern-day Europe. They have a tolerance to Nazism due to the deliberate policy of Brussels aimed at rewriting of history, primarily the history of World War II. Why are they doing so? Because the principles that were fundamental principles of the Third Reich never disappeared. There was a separation into those who are entitled to something and have no rights at all. And now it is reformulated as the jungles and the garden, according to Mr. Borrell. There are talks about a golden billion, and the idea that the rest should work for the sake of this golden billion. The idea of neocolonialism. There is an idea that there are first-class people and the remaining people who should work and pay the rest for the sake of the first-class people. That's why they're not going to fight against it. For them, they are probably uncomfortable. But quite habitual manifestations of their traditional philosophy. Therefore, they keep silent about these pages, terrible pages from the history. That is why they try to rewrite history in order to whitewash the historical realities. The revisionist war is dictated by ideological ideas of Brussels. They try to distort the image of Russia. They present it as an aggressive state. They eliminate any mentioning of the deeds of the Red Army that made the decisive contribution to liberation of concentration camps and prevention of massive elimination of people in many countries of Europe. They equate Stalinism and Nazism and refer to it as an element of the unity of the European Union. It is a terrible logic. They substitute historical realities and they turn Nazism. Just read the EU documents. They now are not talking about Nazism directly. They are now talking about authoritarianism. Historians. It's not historians who describe the Third Reich as Nazism. Those were the people within the Third Reich that invented these concepts. Nazism was an ideology of the Third Reich. It was a declared ideology. So what happened now? Why should they pretend that it never existed and invent some sort of authoritarianism? Authoritarianism is something completely different. But we see that many European countries are not ready yet to accept the elimination of historical truth. Fortunately. But we see the cynical position of the masters in Latvia towards the EU. They keep silent and pretend to ignore the marches with fascist and Nazi symbols in order to not to take any steps, but they have to pay attention to such facts. In reality, they only provoke the Baltics. The European Union only provokes the Baltic states to continue their evil practice of glorifying these as criminals. Thank you so much for your answer. We move on. Is the Večernje Novosti of Serbia here with us?
Speak in English. Students and opposition in Serbia are organizing a protest in Belgrade this Saturday, which they are already announcing as the new October 5th, the date when the Slobodan Milosevic government was overthrown. At the same time, the authorities claim to have information that demonstrators are planning to seize the National Assembly, the Constitutional Court, and the National Television building. In your opinion, what kind of outcome is possible, and what consequences could this have for stability for the entire region? I mean, Balkan region.
Well, we continue monitoring what's happening in Serbia, because we're not simply talking about a country. In our continent is a friendly state, and the Serbian people are very close to us. Undoubtedly, we once again call to a moderate policy, and we call everyone who is involved in what's going on in the country and understand the possible consequences of reckless steps. We expect normalization of the situation through a mutually respectful dialogue. Do you have any further questions? Do you have any further questions? Any further questions? Any further questions? Any more questions? Can you hear the interpretation? Do you have anything?
Yes, you can.
Okay.
Sorry, can you?
Thank you so much. С нами
Is Tavria here with us? Yes, good afternoon. We've already raised the issue of foreign mercenaries. We have a question regarding their search. We know that most mercenaries act on the side of nationalists in the armed forces of Ukraine. We know for sure that in the Kursk region there are mercenaries from Latin America. Do we have an international mechanism to hold the mercenaries accountable? And is the MFA working with the countries from which the mercenaries travel to the new regions of Russia? First, I would like to draw your attention to the words by President of Russia regarding the mercenaries and how we classify them. It is something that is very important. An important statement was made. And secondly, let me say this. Initially, we said that mercenaries should not expect anything good, and we warned them of their future. Their future is quite obvious. They fall hostage to the ambitions of their own regimes. They fall hostage to the deception of the Kiev regime. They were locked by different promises. Some were sent as mercenaries, but indeed, they were representatives of special services of their respective countries. Some were attracted by the statements that allegedly democracy in Ukraine is under threat. And we explained why they are sent there and what would happen to them in the future. And we warned them that we won't treat them differently simply because they have foreign passports. On many occasions did we draw the attention to the activities of the respective countries that made it possible for Ukrainian embassies to violate the provisions of the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic and Consular Relations and recruit not mercenaries, but just fighters with a one-way ticket. There are countries that we qualify as unfriendly, and from those countries we heard in response that they pretended not to understand what we are talking about. And some people simply tried to conceal the fact that they sent their own special agents to Ukraine. But now the situation has changed when it turned out that everything we had been warning about is truth. That's how it's going to be. And these mercenaries and those who called themselves mercenaries but in reality represented the special services of the states, they didn't answer the phone calls of their families, so it was obvious they would never answer these calls, or when they found themselves as the defendants, when criminal proceedings were initiated against them. Their position of those changed who back in 2022 in different NATO countries and NATO-central countries didn't want to listen to us.
So they just started to worry, started really to take active actions and to send someone with requests how to return someone, how to facilitate. They just did not hear, they just before did not want to hear what they were told. They were just absolutely sure in the blitzkrieg they were preparing. It was just absolutely sure. But it was a miscalculation by them. So we are back to point one, what yesterday the President of the Russian Federation said about mercenaries. We will do our best for this very fragment to be translated into a maximum number of languages and be available to everyone who follows the situation from abroad. And we regularly say that our law enforcement authorities conduct the relevant work according to the tickets bought by the mercenaries, so to say. For someone it's a one-way ticket, someone is spared by the fate and they become subject to criminal proceedings. That's what makes them sober. You have seen the interviews of those mercenaries, their tears, you have seen them, tears not believed by many people because they have been warned and their hands are smeared with blood of innocent victims and civilians as well. Honestly, it's possible to believe them repenting sincerely. Yes, it can be believed. When they actually say they have realized everything, they have understood everything, they have become the victims of such deception. Yes, they can be believed in such cases, but we have repeatedly commented on this issue and have provided clarifications, have conducted the relevant work, and daily, for a very long period, in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, there is the Office of the Ambassador at Large, Mr. Miroshnik, who makes systematic all the information about the crimes by the Kiev regime, makes reports distributed by our offices abroad, offices, representations at international organizations. They are published by the Foreign Ministry. They are transmitted to our colleagues, to representatives at international organizations. They are published for general public, and there is a section there about mercenaries. Thank you very much. Thank you. Is Rudaf channel with us? Yes, good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. Rudaf is here. I will have two questions. As you can guess, the Kurdish issue, primarily in Turkey, the Kurdistan Workers' Party has declared since the 1st of March the ceasefire in Turkey. It has been against the background of the call of the leader of the PKK, who is imprisoned, to lay down the arms and to stop the hostilities with Turkey. Mr. Öcalan, the head of the PKK, also said that the PKK should be disbanded. How does Moscow estimate this step, and what can be the influence of this step in the region and in Turkey itself? Well, we believe that all the steps aimed at de-escalation of violence in the country, in the region as a whole, aimed at the creation of the atmosphere of trust, resolving the issue with peaceful methods, they can only be welcomed, and we hope that it will contribute to achieving peace, strengthening stability and security. Thank you very much. The second question is about Syria and also the Kurdish issue. The Syrian government and the Kurdish forces, the democratic forces of Syria, on the 10th of March, they signed the agreement that accepts the rights of the Kurds in the Syrian states and ensures the integration of the key institutes of the Kurdish autonomy into the state institutions for cooperation in security. Do you think this will ensure, the new agreement will ensure the integrity of Syria and lead it to long-term stability, taking into account the events that took place in the west of Syria? Guided by the principle we have mentioned many times, respect for territorial integrity and sovereignty of Syria, Russia welcomes the agreement that has been reached on the Trans-Euphrates being returned to the Syrian states, taking into account all the ethnic confessional groups living in the region. We believe that it is the Syrians themselves that should determine the fate of their country within the framework of the wide national dialogue, and we regard the agreement between the Syrian government and the heads of the Syrian democratic forces as an important step to restore the unity of Syria, to strengthen its security and stability, And we think that the practical implementation of the agreements reached will be fraught with multidimensional problems, difficulties, challenges, and constructive mood should be preserved, and readiness for compromise. And we hope that the countries will succeed in that. Thank you. Thank you. Is Bigger Asia with us? Yes, hello, Madam Zakharova. Ina Fernandez, Big Asia channel. We have one question. Last week, a chargé d'affaires of China in Moscow noted that Russia and China seek future optimization of the visa regime. Please tell us how active is the work by the Russian Foreign Ministry in this area? What can facilitate mutual trips? And can Russian tourists hope for trips to China, visa-free trips to China in the foreseeable future? So let us start from the second part of the question. As of now, Russian tourists, and by the way, Chinese tourists, have an opportunity to travel between our countries or to our countries visa-free as part of tourist groups on the basis of the intergovernmental agreement of the 29th of February 2000. And last year, such an instrument, such an opportunity was taken by more than 1 million people, including 567,000 Chinese tourists and 468,000 Russian tourists. So in general, it is 50-50, so, but a little bit more Chinese tourists. But the numbers are just testify for themselves. The first part of your question. Now, the relevant authorities conduct the work to amend this agreement in order to further facilitate the conditions for mutual travel. These issues, namely bilateral cooperation, bilateral interaction, in order to improve the tourist flows, the humanitarian exchanges, this issue is in the focus of the attention of the Commission on Cooperation in Tourism, of the Russian-Chinese Humanitarian Cooperation Commission, and on the agenda of the top officials of the state. This issue is always present. It's not just the desire of people to see our countries, to travel, to go to our countries. An additional task is for people to recognize themselves, to recognize the countries that are neighbors. It's the second largest border for our country, the border with China. Such a huge potential for business cooperation, joint interaction. With the Chinese partners, we constantly have dialogue on the issues of permanent liberalization of mutual trips. There is an agreement on facilitation of mutual trips of 2013. This agreement includes the visa facilitation, visa requirements with special area of Hong Kong and Macau, Hong Kong 2009 and Macau 2012. And China has been included into the list of states with multiple entry visa. And there is data about that, about the hotels in a unified roster. And there is also data about ski tracks, and unified e-visa is also available to Chinese citizens. What opportunities does it provide? To reside in our country for 16 days with a private or business trip as a tourist or as a participant of sports, economic events. In the near perspective, this term will be increased from 60 to 120 days. And e-visa will will be increased from 16 to 20 days. coming back to China, we interact in this area based on the current agreements. This work is not terminated. It is done daily. It is done thoroughly. Thank you very much for such a detailed and clear answer. Thank you. Is author I with us? Hello, Madam Zakharova. Ruslan Pankratov, author I. Just recently, on the 10th of March, our edition was attacked by, it was a large-scale cyber attack in which many countries participated, like Turkey, the USA, Great Britain, Belgium, Ukraine, Poland. It's surprising there were no Baltic states there. Obviously, they are just getting ready for a Waffen-SS march. I mean, the official government. They just have a torchlight procedure planned. They have no time. And of course, we'll link this with us publishing Russian Financial Group. From Latvia, Spain, and the Kingdom of Monaco, there were threats because of the publication. But the question is about the Ministry of the Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation doing together with law enforcement authorities in order to protect our Russian media from such cyber attacks. And maybe it will be obvious just to present it at such on such platforms as the UN brings this issue about protection from cyber threats. Actually, this issue, it has two dimensions. The first one is law enforcement authorities. They investigate cyber crimes, and the competent authorities do their best in order to prevent some possible crimes, cyber crimes. This is the first block about law enforcement authorities. If we have such experience, we have detected the criminals, we have revealed the criminal chains, we have prosecuted such cases. It's our domestic concepts on information security set of measures is the first point. The second issue is what you were talking about, the discussing this issue on international platforms. This work is done systematically by Foreign Ministry, not only to promote our approaches, but to practically implement these approaches in the documents of international organizations. One of the tasks is to prevent the impunity of the perpetrators, to develop the rules of the game for everyone, the agreements that would ensure the effective and transparent regulation of the global information space. The first step was the adoption by the UN General Assembly on the initiative of Russia of the Convention Countering Cybercrime. This document will allow for a real interaction of law enforcement authorities of participating states in countering cyber crimes, among other things, in relation to Russian journalists, as you have said rightly. We also seek the adoption of such documents, such agreements on international information security in countering prevention of interstate conflicts. It's the open-ended working group on international information security and the ad hoc committee on developing the comprehensive convention on countering cybercrime. With regard to the international platforms, including the UN and BRICS, based on our mandate, an example of such initiative is the Convention on Countering Cybercrime approved recently and signed for signature. Regarding the issue of cyber attacks in general, we face them daily. We provide statistical data, especially when the attacks themselves are unprecedented and our resources, it is difficult for them to cope. And for those people who are engaged in such attacks, who allegedly do not have their own hackers and who act from different countries, our government bodies and regional authorities, municipal bodies, they just are well aware what cyber attacks are. Our business, our companies, telecom operators, banking sector, websites, services provided online, they are endlessly targeted by some sophisticated attacks. So it's continuation of the cyber aggression coordinated from abroad, aggression against our country. The purpose of that is multidimensional destabilization in our country, detrimental to our economy, some force majeure events and technogenical catastrophes even. It would not be correct here just to implement one set of measures in one sphere. We need to act here in a comprehensive manner and a systematic manner. Thank you very much. It was a detailed reply. Thank you. Is the voice of the fatherland with us? Yes. Hello, Madam Zakharova. We have two questions today. The first of them, can we say now that the US has surrendered to the Russian Federation? And the question is, what did they fear? But I beg you, please. So maybe we will somehow make them influence Europe in order to stop the aggression. But we are not here writing some novels or some symposium of some producers of thrillers or just filming some detective series. We are at an event that is called the briefing of the Foreign Ministry of the Russian Federation. I am the official representative of the Foreign Ministry. I comment on the facts, on the events. I respond to your questions on the agenda. As you want to just this wording, this fictional wording of your ideas, your philosophy, it's your right, so to say, but you can do what you want. But my sphere is, I have my mandate here. If you have some exact questions on some exact event, maybe some general nature, but connected with my scope, I would reply to them always. Just such fictional images, they are very nice, but in estimation of some exact events. I have mentioned that many times, and I will repeat. Many people think you ask provocative questions, not only to me, but in general. Many think like that. But just do not provide me a pretext if you do not want me to support this point of view. We have practical work conducted now, dialogue conducted. It is being started with the American side.
What kind of global assessments, especially of such a quality, we can give? But what for? What's your aim? What's your purpose? I don't really understand that. If we are talking about fiction, that this question is not for me. Many ask questions about your wordings, and I'm starting to wonder about this as well. I'm always open to all the questions. If you have certain topics and questions regarding my work, I'm prepared to answer, but I would ask you not to do that. And what about the negotiations with the US right now? I commented on it. Sorry, not I, but Mr. Ushakov commented on it regarding the contacts that already took place, you can look into his comments. But other contacts that are only in our plans, they did not take place, but they may take place even today. But we have not participated. When they take place, we'll inform you about it. Thank you. And of course, we maintain contacts at the diplomatic level through our missions. They are becoming more and more active. In comparison with the previous administration, there are a lot of issues. We expect the start of the work of our ambassador to Washington, and our embassy already sees trend to reinvigorate the feedback from the State Department. We never blocked such contacts. We only responded in kind if we saw such a treatment. We maintain contacts with the American Embassy in Moscow. We have issues outlined, not only to discuss, but to work out. At the level of our embassies and diplomats, contacts reinvigorated. I'd say they stopped being blocked and have a trend to reinvigorate. Thank you. Thanks to you. Are there any questions? I am prepared to answer them. If no one is going to join us, then thank you very much. I wish you all the best. Good